Welcome, my dear audience, to this new episode of the Lighthouse. I would like to welcome my distinguished guest today, Dr. Janelle Christine Simmons. She was born in the Bronx and raised in Flushing, Queens, New York. She holds 5 higher education degrees, which culminated in the fifth being an education doctorate in educational leadership from Liberty University. She's a published author, a retired psychology adjunct professor, and experienced nonprofit manager, and a previous government employee. She aspires to continue publishing books and found a music museum. Welcome, Dr. Janelle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khalil.
What
How
is
are
the
you today?
greatest challenge of your life so far?
I think one of the greatest challenges in my life was when I was completing my doctorate degree. And during the course of the doctorate degree, I worked full time at a nonprofit and ran school programming. I worked part time as a psychology adjunct at the university. I was doing ministry in church. I was a Bible study teacher and in the choir and the worship team. And then I was still tending to family, and quite a few of my family members became ill at that time. And then in the midst of that, I was assaulted. And so when I was assaulted, my whole world turned upside down, and I hadn't told anyone. So it took me several months before I told someone in my immediate family that I had been raped. And their response was not exactly what I expected. Some people blamed me, and it took me a long time to heal from that situation. At the same time, I was still going into the police precinct um, and basically giving testimony that was for naught. I must have gone there like 10 or 11 times. I still had to follow up with the hospital and uh, receive results for any STDs or any other diseases. And so it was just a very trying time and very emotional and very stressful.
My heart is broken for hearing that. It's a terrible experience, but what doesn't break you, it makes you stronger.
This is
This is
true.
what I believe, and I'm hoping this what happened. So, how did you overcome this challenge?
Well, one, I took charge of the situation. So even though I didn't tell family members, I shared with a few friends, one who was an elder in the church. I shared with the person I was dating at that time. Ironically, our argument while we were in the relationship was that I wouldn't have sex with him, and I never even kissed him. And then this happened. So it was a very strange situation, to say the least. And I also had a quote unquote previous student friend who came to the precinct with me to report the crime. So she housed me in that area and helped me process the situation. So that was my first line of defense. I kept schedules. I had found evidence, so I bagged the evidence. Initially, I didn't go to the precinct first. I went to the hospital first, and it took me a number of days before I felt comfortable enough to do so. And I completed a rape kit. I spoke to the hospital police, and I had gone alone. Then when I went to the precinct, I brought someone. So I was at that time I had rejected a contract and deferred it to teach in China. So after doing all the testing, saying I was cleared, the hospital called me back, and I remember it was an Indian Hindu nurse, and she started yelling at me that I'm a whore and it's my fault. You would think we were not in America, actually. And I was confused, and she said, you have an STD, which it was the clap, which is chlamydia. And I said, I told you when I first came into the hospital that I felt burning, and I don't understand why you didn't check then. So they gave me a regimen of antibiotics, which they hurried for me because I was flying to China to teach psychology. And it was at the same time I was packing up my apartment. I lived in Jersey then, and I lived in that apartment about 3 years. And so there were a lot of things going on. I cleaned it up as much as possible, packed it up as much as possible, and then asked some of my relatives if they could help me finish. So they did. They helped finish cleaning up the apartment. And the landlord was very kind. I didn't get really charged for anything. He said, you had a good cleanup team. And I flew to China. So in China, somehow I was separated enough initially that I could rest and consider it. And then I started to pray and fast and really consider what was going on. And I had to also take steps within myself. I was became very introspective. So the issue was previously I've done ministry for a long time, and visiting people's homes is not an issue. And I visited people's homes alone, which is technically not biblical, but I've never had an issue, never thought about it. And so I was bringing food to it was a gentleman I had briefly spoken to, and he had some issues with his ankle from gout. And he was saying that his treatment, his medical treatment wasn't working. So I created a homeopathic treatment for him and brought it up, which is how it led to that. So fast forward, I was speaking to my friends in China and then came to find out I use a VoIP, that someone had hacked my computer and broadcasted the conversation. And so I don't know how far it went. I know throughout China it was heard that I had been raped, which was kind of shocking to me. And it was I cried a lot, don't get me wrong. But then I also focused on my students, creating the curriculum. I had a mentor from the partner university, which was SUNY New Paltz, who helped me integrate things like psychology, engineering, etc. I hung out with the greater student body and went on class trips and tours. I I went myself to Beijing and other places in China and just relaxed, would stay at a Novotel hotel and get manicures and would just really, I pampered myself a lot. And I had to drop because the school in China, they constantly block the internet due to allegedly students cheating. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I was told even from the embassy. I had dropped my Liberty University course that I was working on then, and then picked it up later. So I gave myself time. I watched sermons online. I took lots of walks. I controlled my diet. I tried to make as healthy a diet as possible. I cooked most of my meals except for lunch, which I would go to my favorite Chinese restaurant or go to a halal cart that was up the block, and just talk with the locals. And I tried to immerse myself as much as possible in the culture. I would go to Shanghai and go to art stores and pick up art paraphernalia and work on paintings, etc. And then, of course, I spoke to my colleagues, and sometimes I would take walks with my colleagues and things of that nature. So the next shock wasn't as bad. I started to get harassed by the Chinese government for whatever reason, and then eventually, a government official told me it's not our government, it's your government. To which I still don't understand the statement completely. But I returned. I finished a shortened contract because it's supposed to be 10 months previously, but I started later. So I finished about a 4-month contract, returned to the United States. That's when I told my family finally what had happened, and did not go that well. But I continued to work. I continued to go to church. I switched churches though. I continued, I was a little isolated. A lot of my friends, I had posted it on Facebook to warn them. And it clearly delineated who are my friends and who are not, because a lot of people are like, ah, she got raped, too bad, bye. And it was a little bit shocking because when I was raped was February 5th, 2013. And we're in 2023, and there are still some of those people I knew from childhood, like elementary school or junior high school, that we don't speak anymore. So the situation was a little bit stressful, straining. I started to hear testimony of other women who had been assaulted, even some men who had been assaulted. And I never joined a help group. I was never offered counseling. I was never even offered car fare for going to the police precinct back and forth and other meetings in the hospital. But I started to realize that there is a limitation to what man can do, but there is no limitation to what God can do. And so my walk with God became much deeper, much more prolific, and realer and closer, to the point where now, if people come and say something, I'm just like, whatever, or people will say, like, now you don't have any friends sometimes, or you don't have a boyfriend. And I said, even if I don't have a boyfriend, excuse me, this is in Christian theology, not Islamic theology. God is my husband and I am his wife. I'm his beloved. And so it was never going to be a sex relationship anyway. We're best friends. He is not only my God, but my friend. And I walk with him every day. And so what you say, what your report is not what God's report is of me. And so I think being strengthened in the word of God, being strengthened in introspection, being strengthened by interacting with nature, and then just admitting, it was unwise to go to his apartment alone. That part is your fault. but the rape is his fault because when I said no, he should have stopped. And taking responsibility for what I did or didn't do, and then also assigning the correct responsibility or consequence to what that person did or didn't do. And that goes from the rapist to the hospital staff to the police to friends and family, etc. Gave me a very clear perspective on who I am, how to deal with trauma, how to adapt, and how to build my resiliency.
It's good to hear that you have managed the situation. Like as I can see, the connection to religion and to your past experience with the project management. It helped you
Hmm.
organize, like what you are going to do about this situation. But if looking back now at that situation, what would you have done differently about it?
I understand. I always thought maybe I would have told my family first, but then I thought I wasn't emotionally ready to tell them. I thought maybe I would have told a childhood friend first. But then I was thinking I probably wouldn't have told them either because growing up, I had a lot of friends from third world countries. I had a lot of friends who were illegal immigrants here. I know they don't use the term illegal, whatever the term is now. At that time, we used the term illegal immigrants. They were not legally residing in the United States. And so a lot of my life, I would forego certain positions, etc., to make sure that they weren't caught until I could make sure they got citizenship and move on. And so I thought about it and I said, no, I wouldn't have told them either because I know that to them, they would probably hear it and think that's nothing. And the reason why they would think it's nothing is because many of them were abused once they were found out to not be legal citizens here by various government officials, including the police. So to them, they'd probably be like, you're just stupid for reporting it to the police. But the only thing I think maybe I would have changed is when I reported the actual crime. I think I would have reported it sooner, and I would should have probably gone a day or two after. And the other issue, or even less, but the other issue is um, I did shower feeling dirty, and that removes evidence. So physical evidence was not on my body, although I had physical evidence on my clothing, etc., including sperm samples, which I bagged and labeled, etc. Other than those two things, I'm not sure I would have changed anything. I do know I continue to do my schoolwork once I returned from China. I'm not sure if I would change it, but I was kind of getting a little bit pummeled from my university also. And part of it may have been a character track, part of it may have been what was heard. Because I remember I took a class called educational law, and there was two professors, and one is called Dr. Claxton. And Dr. Claxton had mentioned something in passing during the class that sometimes when students are on campus, the school is alerted to or are notified about things like rapes. But if the student is off campus, the university often does not know. And so by the time they find out what the situation is, depending on what the factors are, they can't address it. And there may have been some extenuating circumstances to a situation. It was a very vague comment, but he was looking dead at me, and I pretty much knew he knew I had been raped. But he couldn't directly say anything to me because I wasn't an on campus student. I only went to campus for residencies. And that was a little bit strange. But other than that, no, I continued to do my work. I had a dissertation committee. I continued to travel. I continued to speak. I continued to do ministry. I continued to feed the homeless. And I think those things also encouraged me because it's not that all your life is lesser and mine is better, because we may have all had some of the same situations by that point. Just I had a home where they didn't, or this or that. But it was encouraging to see that there are people who have suffered and they have stood up. In the Bible, there's a verse that talks about Jesus speaks to his disciples and he says that, basically don't think you won't suffer, because if I suffered and you follow me and you wish to be more like me, what they hated in me, they're also going to hate in you. So you're also going to suffer many of the same things I suffered. And so knowing that from suffering, like a diamond in the rough, like like pearls getting graded, and becoming a pearl, like a moth struggling to become a butterfly, that there are trials and tribulations that occur to many of us through this life, that we can use it as an opportunity to refine ourselves and become stronger more compassionate, or we can use it as an opportunity to blame or give up. And so, yeah, except for those two previous factors I mentioned, I don't think I would have changed anything. I would have continued to do my work. I would have continued to teach my students. I would have continued to uh, go to meetings and speak and even preach sometimes, etc. No, there's nothing much else I would have changed at all.
This is very insightful. I like the idea of going back to religious beliefs because it's supposed to be there to support us in moving on in this life. So I agree
Mhm.
with you about it. What one piece of advice would you give to young people out of this experience?
I think I would tell young people, regardless of what happens. I mean, at each stage of life, as we go from being a baby to being a teenager, etc., we are finding ourselves. And we are never perfect and we are never fully there yet. But I would say know what you believe. For example, we can believe different things. We may even debate about it, argue about it. But if I know who you are and you know who I am, we can interact and be. And I think a lot of young people, they will try to conform to other people's images sometimes to be accepted or to feel loved. And my position is, if you have to completely change unwillingly for someone and change completely in general to feel loved and accepted, then that person does not love you. It's abuse. So I should be able to come to the table and you should be able to come to the table, and I get to know about you, your family, where you're from, what you believe, if you believe in God or not. If so, what religion is your identification linked to, etc. And same for me. And I would encourage all young people to really know who they are. And no matter what happens, if you know who you are, nobody can completely tear you down. They may knock you off the peg for a while. But there's a proverb that says, 7 times a righteous man falls down, and 7 times he gets up. And it means no matter how many times you fall, get up, and God will help you to get up, because Psalm 121 says, I lift my eyes to the heavens. Where does my help come from? It cometh from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So if no one else will accept you, if no one else knows you, if no one else can respect who you are in a moment of time in life, what does it matter to you? If the God who created everything, we cannot create the earth, we cannot create the planets, we cannot create the universe. If that God created everything and then created you and said you are worth so much, then what does it matter what anyone thinks? And if you continue to walk in that truth and that light, people will start to change themselves to go towards you, because light is the only thing that shines in the darkness.
Very beautifully said. I wouldn't have thought of it in a better way. And I'm very thankful that you have shared this experience with us. And I'm sure young people will learn from it in their future life. Thank you very much, Dr. Janelle.
Thank you too, Mr. Khalil. It was a pleasure meeting you.